Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laser Focus. This is the deep dive pop culture podcast from Nerdist. This is Kyle Anderson. My name is, you know me. I'm Kyle Anderson. Thank you for listening. Joining me this week is, of course, friend of the show, one of the rotating co-worker guests back on the show, Eric Diaz. Hey, bud.
Hello.
And this go round, we're talking about the X-Men again because that's basically every fourth thing Eric and I talk about is the X-Men. But this year is a big anniversary for the X-Men in the movies and kind of the beginning of superhero films as we know them, which was only about 2 or 3 years removed from what many consider the death knell of like the old style of superhero movie, which is Batman and Robin. And yeah, so it's the first X-Men movie, and we're going to talk about, the movie specifically. I do want to talk about, like, especially 25 years later, what did work, what didn't work, what about it was kind of revolutionary, what obviously they had to change in order to make it palatable for a general movie going audience, who were not big comic book fans, and obviously going forward and stuff like that. This is not going to be a huge like X-Men movie franchise retrospective. I'm sure we'll do that at some point, but it's been a really long time since I've actually like spent, any decent amount of time thinking about or talking about the first one. Cause I almost always just skip to X2, which is a better movie. I think we both agree on that.
Yeah.
And one thing we do want to get out of the way quickly is that, this was directed by Bryan Singer, as were the second movie and Days of Future Past and Apocalypse. Two of those other ones that I mentioned are great and maybe the best of the X-Men movies.
He produced First Class too. So
And he produced
had
First
he
Class.
had a hand in that.
Yeah. So, and I think, I think it was relatively known at the time, but definitely now, his kind of status as a creepy monster behind the scenes has come to the forefront. And so this is sort of we're not here to like whether we say good things or bad things about the film, it's the film. And even if we're praising direction, we are definitely not praising the director as a dude who is not a good man. So we just wanted to get that out of the way. It's hard to separate the art from the artist, especially when the artist is still alive. And apparently non-repentant. But yeah. Coming into like the guy who made Usual Suspects wanting to make an X-Men movie felt like, oh wow, there's actually some sort of legitimacy involved with this project.
Yeah. I've often said X-Men isn't by any means the best superhero movie ever made, or even in the top 20. However, it's like perhaps the most important superhero movie ever made, because it set the tone for everything that's come in the next 25 years.
Yeah. Without it, I mean, I think we've mentioned on the show, you and I at least, but if not for X-Men and then 2 years later, the first Spider-Man movie, like we would not be in the place we are in terms of comic book media writ large. And we have mentioned too that the MCU would not exist without the X-Men movies because
no way.
Kevin Feige got his start working under Lauren Schuler Donner. As he's just like an associate producer or something like that on the X-Men movies. But yeah, so it's really, it's interesting. And also like, it's the messiest of all the franchises.
Oh, for sure.
By far. Cause they kept just going, well, I guess we'll just do this. And like, I kind of love it for that. But also it makes it tough. But also like why, I guess it is important. So they do kind of want to pay lip service to it or pay respect to it where it was kind of ahead of its time. But, the fact that, next year we're getting Avengers Doomsday with all or many of the Fox X-Men actors who are all very old at this point.
Yeah.
It's
this
weird.
Recording, mostly it's the men.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we'll see.
We'll see. Yeah. So let's go back to the early, late 90s. There had been talk, especially in the mid 90s, of wanting to do an X-Men movie or trying to get an X-Men movie off the ground. And I think, I remember I was just a kid, but like reading about like they wanted Jean-Claude Van Damme or whoever to play.
You're talking about the Wizard magazine, like,
Yeah,
casting call, all they were obsessed with. The one they did get right, though, because they always wanted Patrick Stewart as Professor Xavier, and that
that one
happened.
was a no-brainer, honestly. Like it's
Yeah,
perfect. It was
yeah,
great casting. Still remains maybe the best casting of the entire X-Men franchise.
yeah.
But cast your mind back, like what in the lead up to it coming out, do you remember like hearing, "Oh my god, they actually are making it," and then like
Oh, for sure.
seeing stuff come out?
I remember, I'm that fan, so I remember being at a convention in, like, the mid to late '90s, and there was a script by the guy that wrote Men in Black. I forget his name now, but, and it was decent, but, like, it was still doing that thing of, like, they weren't in costumes, they were just very, very scared of just doing the X-Men comics, and the lineup of the team kind of was always changing from script to script. There was always Professor X, there was always a version of Magneto, there was always Wolverine in the center. Scott and Jean, I think, were always there, but like everybody else, the rest of it was always just like sometimes it's Beast, sometimes it's Storm, sometimes it's they didn't know what to do. Um, I remember an early script being pretty good. I don't know if it's good by today's standards. It's just a little bit too far off from what X-Men is, what we think of. But I forgive X-Men movies a little bit for how non-comic booky they are for because of when they came out and
Mhm.
what comic book movies were. I think people kind of forget if they weren't alive or they weren't cognizant of stuff that in the 90s comic book movies were a very different beast. There weren't that many of them, and when they were around, they were big and gaudy and campy. I mean, they didn't take the source material very seriously. I mean, for as much as we say Batman 89 did, Batman 89 is filled with campy stuff.
For sure.
It didn't seem so at the time, but it none of them really took it seriously. And then, out comes X-Men that starts in the Holocaust. Like it
Mhm.
just blew people like what is like I remember seeing it with a friend who were like, "What the hell? I thought this was a comic book movie." Like my friend was like, who's a non-comic book person was like, I okay. They were just sort of it shocked, and I feel like that's almost the most important scene in the movie. It is letting you know this is set in a grounded reality that reflects ours, with
Mhm.
all the horrible things that happened, and everything, and it is faithful to Magneto's origin story. Like they didn't make that
Yeah.
up. They didn't pull that from out of their butt. That's from the Chris Claremont comics.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of my favorite thing about looking back on the first two anyway. The third movie's a mess, but
Yeah.
um for all that they changed and kind of tried to, obviously there's the joke about the yellow spandex and all that stuff, and they like tried to make them cool and more like
The
realistic
Matrix.
and the Matrixy, exactly. The one thing that they definitely got right was the central metaphor. I think everybody
Yep.
involved kind of understood that X-Men is about reflecting the marginalized in communities
Hmm.
and um, having them cast out for no other reason than how they were born and all that stuff. And without that metaphor, like the X-Men just simply don't work. And that's like I hope that going forward in the MCU that remains the case, because without that they aren't they're just any old superhero team.
Right. Like
Um
that is super crucial. I think it fails to do certain things that the comics did, which is the soap opera is a little bit there, but it's really just the love triangle. It
mhm.
doesn't really have the soap opera for the rest of the cast. They're kind of just there, but it, it mostly gets it right. I mean, I remember sitting in the theater going, "Oh my god, like this is pretty much the X-Men," and it's not treating it like camp, and it's not,
Yeah.
like them not having costumes was kind of annoying, but we were so happy to have it. Like it was a different time, and because they got the characters right for the most part, like it was pretty wild, to see it treated seriously.
Yeah. And like that is absolutely the thing that stands out the most to me, is that like one of my favorite parts of the comics and the cartoon too was the interplay between Professor X and Magneto, and having
Yeah.
actors of Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen's stature portraying those characters was like we're giving
Yeah,
it the gravitas that it needs.
absolutely. And they were working without a big budget. Even for the time, it did not have a huge budget. It had a
Mhm.
decent budget, but it wasn't. what they spend on superhero movies now, at all. And and so like now when you watch it, it does kind of look like an expensive FX pilot, like it doesn't have the big grand finale set pieces. It's kind of fought in a gift shop, like it's a little low rent in that way, but the rest of it's so good that you don't care, like it's the character stuff is so right for the
Yeah,
most part.
100%. I think that um yeah, because it was only so it was made for $75 million, which in today's money would be um 140-ish million dollars, which
Yeah,
is, I
like
mean,
it's
that's a
not
huge amount,
huge,
basically double, but
but it's not what
um
they spend on the average superhero movie now.
no, not even
Like
close.
every superhero movie now is like around 200 million. Like none of them are for less than that. Like they have big budgets, and it didn't even have a big budget for the time.
No.
You know,
And the amount of people who are in it, because that's the other thing about the X-Men, is that it needs pretty much to have a big cast. Like they obviously decided with later, spin-offs and stuff, like let's focus just on Wolverine for 3 movies, or let's focus just on, Deadpool. But the X-Men needs to be a huge team. Even,
yeah,
you know, the initial 5, fine. But what most people consider the X-Men, like they couldn't have done a movie at that point without Wolverine or
no,
Cyclops
no
or,
way.
Storm, or these people that are pretty close to everybody who, um, wanted in the movie. There were a couple like omissions. Obviously, Beast
Beast
didn't
was
show
supposed,
up.
yeah,
Yeah.
Beast was supposed to. He's in very early concept art for the movie. Because of course he was a major part of the animated series, and they were really trying to get as many of the animated lineup as they could.
Yeah.
But Beast was he was too pricey to do. Like and they chose to focus on Mystique instead. Maybe not a bad call, because she became pretty iconic, and a big part of the selling of that movie and the trailers and the everything was,
Mhm.
that version of Rebecca Romaine as Mystique.
And it's wild too that like Mystique stuck around through almost all the sequels. Like she gets depowered, I think, in the 3rd movie, right?
She gets depowered pretty quickly, yeah.
And is barely in it. But for the all the rest of the movies, like she is a major part of it. And I think,
Mhm.
which is not the case in the comics. Like she has her own like very deep,
Yeah.
and complex history, but it's not intertwined with Charles at all, which is what the movies eventually
No,
made it.
they've since retconned some of that into
Yeah.
her. Like she now has a past with Charles post, but that was after, that's to reflect the movies.
Right.
She didn't before, really. Um and that's something that's very common with comic book movies, that that I always say with comic book movies and comic books, the tail wags the dog. Whatever becomes popular in the mainstream consciousness, the comics will adopt. you know
Very much.
you know
And it was a a successful movie. It made almost
yeah.
$300 million, but it was not the most successful movie that year. It was only
Nope.
the ninth best,
Yeah.
most. So it was by no means a like sure thing.
They
Um,
were thinking it was going to bomb. Like the general feeling from everything I've read is that everybody at Fox thought this was going to bomb. They had no faith. This is 3 years out of Batman and Robin. Nobody at Fox knew what X-Men was. Like none of the executives had, they weren't, some of them might have had some kind of inkling that it was a big thing, because of the cartoon. Obviously this doesn't happen without the animated series.
right.
That, the animated series success on Fox TV led them to want to have the rights. Like they wanted to be able to make the movie, but very few people knew like what the fuck this was. You know what I
I
mean?
know.
Like they just didn't. It was for nerds. Like this is something nerds knew and kids knew, and they just didn't care. And luckily, there were people who pushed for it. And like they probably looked at this, showed the ratings and the toy sales and the comic sales, and like, look, there's an audience for this. This has been a huge success for now a couple of decades. Like we can make this work, and thankfully, it went through. But I know that anecdotally that like almost nobody there like thought this was going to be a hit. They let it out to die, and then it didn't.
Yeah, I think, and you can kind of get the sense like there is no reason that it should have been as bad. And I think it's just a lot of it is the love for the characters and the franchise, because as you've written about many times and we've talked about many times, like the X-Men saved Marvel at a
Yeah.
period of time when like they were very low, and selling off properties left and right. And if I remember correctly, like Fox got the X-Men rights pretty cheap because at that point
Yes.
they were just getting like stuff was getting sold off left and right. Um, and Spider-Man sold for more money because Spider-Man had more
Yeah, of
cultural
course.
cachet.
Yeah.
But X-Men barely anything. And then they obviously had a huge, franchise on their hands. I want to go through a little bit of the development, just the litany of writers who were attached at different points, either writing treatments or early drafts or whatever. So very early development started in 1984 with James Cameron and Catherine Bigelow, which would have been, I think, way too early for that, because that was before
Yeah.
even that Punisher movie that I actually like, but is not particularly like
Mhm.
faithful to the comics. It's just sort of an action movie. Could have been a lot worse, but it was. I actually think that's pretty good. Fox bought the rights in 1994, and so for the next 6 years, they were getting film treatments from people like Andrew Kevin Walker, who wrote Seven, John
He
Logan,
wrote
who
the script that I read. I remember it was Andrew Kevin Walker, yeah.
John Logan went on to he wrote Gladiator, which
Mhm.
obviously was a massive hit. He wrote the Aviator, and then he went on to work on a bunch of the James Bond movies. So like just a successful screenwriter. Joss Whedon, who of course would then go on to write Astonishing X-Men in the comics. When did that start? 2003 or 4, something like that?
It was right after Angel ended.
That's right. So yeah, like he, saved, I think, a lot of the ideas that he had from his treatment and turned it into the comics.
There's two remnants of the Whedon script in the final product, and it's the worst line in the movie, and it's also the best line in the movie. He has the two. The worst one was the Storm, like, do
Yeah.
you know what that one? And the other one was when Wolverine goes through the metal detectors and it goes off, and Cyclops says, how do I know it's you? And he's like, you're a dick. And he's like, all right.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that way, like, and both of them are pure Whedon, like
Yeah.
good and bad,
Yeah, that storm line is so bad. For those of you who don't remember what we're talking about, I'm sure you do, but do you know what happens when a toad gets struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else. Stupid. Very,
It's
very bad line.
stupid. I also, like, not to defend him too much, but like he's talked about that over the years, and that line was meant to be delivered in complete, like she was supposed to be flippant, like,
Yeah.
Same thing happens to everything, and she decided to be like, because she's Storm, like,
Right.
very like regal, but it's like, that's not the joke of that, like,
No.
so could it have worked in another delivery? Probably, but like the way that they did it, it was quite awful.
Yeah, the joke itself is whatever, and it's a very of the time, like it's very Whedon-y, as you said.
Yeah.
But don't give it to Storm. Storm is,
No,
and I think, to say nothing of the performance, Halle Berry, obviously, an accomplished actor, but like on the page, there's really not a lot for Storm to be doing.
No.
And I think like just being regal is sort of like all she kind of is available to do, because she doesn't, none of the movies are about Storm. And I think that is the downfall of some of these movies, is that there are too many characters and not all of them get
Storm is my favorite X-Men in the comics,
yeah.
and she's very given almost nothing to do. She has more to do in the second one. She gets some cool, like, I'm this powerful, everybody remember moments, and I like that. Part of it's casting. I don't, I like Halle Berry as an actress, but like, she's very from California, and I never
100%.
bought that she's like this regal goddess person. Like, it was a hard sell. The accent didn't really work. She has an accent in the first movie that disappears in the second one, thank God.
Yeah.
But like, they also didn't give her a lot to do, like,
no. She has that one scene with Senator Kelly, and that's kind of her big scene.
Yeah, that's it.
And then she gets to electrocute Toad, which is sort of like, all right.
Yeah.
Michael Chabon also wrote a treatment for it. And he, of course, wrote The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, which is one of the best like novels about writing I think I've ever read. It's also, he also, wrote a ton of comics as well. So that was a good get. And then eventually Singer signed on in 96, and further rewrites with people. He himself also, Ed Solomon, who wrote, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Men
Like,
in Black, Men in Black, I think too.
and Men in Black. Yes, that's right. And later went on to Now You See Me. And then Tom DeSanto came on, and he was just he wrote stuff. He kind of was a co-writer on a lot of things. Like, um, he was the first one to start a reboot or discussion with Universal for a reboot for Battlestar Galactica. But then when it eventually happened, obviously it was Ronald D. Moore, not him. Um, and so that was sort of interesting. And he and Bryan Singer co-teamed on the story, the basic what became the story for the movie. And then there was a script by Christopher McQuarrie, with whom Singer had worked on The Usual Suspects. And then, of course, obviously went on to do all the Mission Impossible movies. And then finally, the credited writer of the screenplay is David Hayter, who also wrote X2. He is a really interesting guy because he also is an actor and was in
A voice actor mostly.
voice actor. He plays Solid Snake in the Metal Gear Solid games. He was in a movie called the Guyver Dark Hero, which is like a
But it's like, it's funny when you look, it's like David Hayter, but you look at all the names you've just listed, and they're all people that are like very well known in the industry.
Yeah.
And then the final credit goes to the guy from the video game, the actor from the video. It's very odd.
Yeah, and I find that so, because at a certain point it's like, well, who can get the credit? Because there's so many different pieces, and you need to prove that you've written, what is it? I forget what the rule is, but it's some considerable percentage of the script of the finished script in order to get credit on the movie, and not just get a story credit or whatever. And sometimes people just go, I don't know, I don't really feel attached to that anymore, so you can kind of take my name off of it or whatever. And so, whether he did a ton or whether he just sort of facilitated everybody else's vision, like, he is the one who's the credited screenwriter. And then he did write X2, which, as we have talked about, co-write X2 is the best of the X-Men sequels. But as you mentioned earlier, like, so many of the scripts drafts had both Beast and Nightcrawler in it. And they were both excised at a certain point because of budget concerns. Beast, I think, especially.
Yeah.
I think the Beast, once CGI got to the point where Beast looked good and you could do performance capture, like, the Beast that is at the end of the Marvels is the best looking Beast by far. Because even Beast in Kelsey Grammer in X3, it's fine, but you can clearly tell it's a guy wearing fur. And it's the same thing with Nicholas Hoult. It's clearly a guy with fur.
Yeah.
Like, a blue werewolf costume, basically. So even up to now, like, it's really tough to get Beast properly. I think from now forward we'll get a really good Beast because of what we've seen with
I think
Hulk.
so.
Like, Hulk is a really good test case for,
and Beast is in in X-Men First Class, where he's really prominent. It's like he's human in his human form for much of it, because for budget reasons.
Yeah. Well, that's why they did that in Days of Future Past. Like, he takes the serum to, like, limit his mutant powers just so that they won't have to put him in makeup all the time.
Right.
And then Nightcrawler too, like, Nightcrawler comes in the second movie, and Alan Cumming has said that the makeup process for that movie was so terrible.
He hated it.
And other problems.
Yeah.
Which is why he never wanted to come back. And then, like, he says it's much better now. So it's interesting that, all of these things that we think of as these are the X-Men.
Yes.
We're not able to be in it for at least, or not main characters. And we talked about when we talked about X-Men 97 last year, but Nightcrawler wasn't even a main character in the cartoon. And
which always bothered me.
Yeah. It's like, he should have been. Like, he's in 2 episodes, maybe only one.
I think he's in 2 or 3. No, it's more than 1, but like, yeah, like I as an 80s kid who grew up with, like, he's just one of the main people.
Yeah.
So it was very weird to me. And I mean, I remember being upset that he wasn't in the big 1991, like, X-Men #1, where they kind of which set the tone for what the animated series would be. I was like, Nightcrawler should be on this cover. Like, he's so major, because it was very much an all-star lineup. And I don't know why him and Kitty were not included. Kitty, I understood, because Jubilee had kind of taken her place as the kid of the team, like the junior member.
Right.
And so Kitty was like, okay, what do we do with Kitty now? But Nightcrawler, man, like, that was always like a glaring omission.
Yeah. And, like, they've tried over the years. Well, I mean, both Kitty and Nightcrawler and Colossus at a certain point. They kind of got shoved over to Excalibur,
Yeah.
um, but I still think that like, yeah, those are in my opinion, and I think yours as well. Like those are three of the main X-Men, and they've never
Yeah.
really gotten their fair dues. Nightcrawler more than anybody else, but they've never really gotten their
Mhm.
fair dues in the films. Um,
Yeah. Except for X2. I mean, Nightcrawler does play a pretty big
yeah,
role, and he's great in that.
yeah, and Kitty does a lot in X. Uh, she's round in X3, but like is the kind of, well, it depends on what cut you're looking
Yeah.
at. But the theatrical cut of Days of Future Past, Kitty is sort of the catalyst for a lot of it. But
Yeah.
um, that's sort of just like it could just be a machine. You know what I mean? It doesn't need to be Kitty
Right.
Pride. Um, but yeah, that's neither here nor there. So what I think is interesting about this one is, and I still don't 100% think it works, is that they make Rogue the in character, and Wolverine too.
Yes.
They're the newbies coming in, and so Rogue sort of fills the. As a '90s kid, Rogue was Superman, basically. You know, she could
Yes.
suck people's powers out, but she flew, was super strong, like was one of the coolest, like most powerful characters.
Yeah, the
And
best description of her I've ever heard was on the Cerebro podcast, where like Rogue 90s Rogue is Dolly Parton with the powers of Superman. That's it.
yeah,
That's the sentence that describes Rogue. And it's not this Rogue in this movie.
no, but it even when she like first appears in the comics, she still has. I mean, she can suck out people's powers, but very quickly into her run, she has sucked all the powers out of Ms. Marvel and becomes
Hmm.
super powered and can fly and all this stuff. And that's so I found that really interesting that was part of her uh story in this, was that just that she could like take people's powers, which is an interesting, thing for her to have to deal with.
Yeah.
Um but that they never gave her more than that, basically,
No.
like in any of the movies. But then she sort of took the place of Jubilee in the first episode of the
Yes.
cartoon, which is that she has this power, she doesn't want it. Her parents or whoever, community are casting her out, and she sort of goes off to the Xavier School and all this stuff.
Yeah.
That I think that's my, like, jumping right to my biggest problem is I think looking back, like that's my least favorite part of the first movie is the whole Rogue thing, because it's just like I don't 100% like that take on the character. It's
Yeah.
it's my
Yeah.
least favorite version of Rogue, I guess, is that she's just a parasite, basically.
Yeah. I think that was the one that's the most different. When people talk about the movies being really different from the comics, I'm like, mostly just Rogue. Like everybody else is pretty much their comic book persona. Like sometimes reduced to one thing a little bit too much. Like
Mhm.
Cyclops, yes, he doesn't have that much screen time. He's really just like, Boy Scout,
Yeah.
Xavier's favorite people. Yeah, it's true. There's not much more to him than that. But that is part of who he is. Like I didn't feel like watching him that like that's not Cyclops. I'm like, no, that's Cyclops. And I think that's the case for everybody except for Rogue, who really
Right.
is, she's Kitty Jubilee mixed with Rogue. She's the entry point, character. And they just decided it was going to be Rogue instead for plot purposes because of what happens at the end of the movie. Like they needed her; she
Right.
becomes central to the plot.
Yes. And the fact that Wolverine can withstand, and I think it works okay in the first movie. Wolverine, I think, becomes way, way, way too much the focal point of everything.
Mm-hmm.
But they did steer into it. X2 is very much about his origins and stuff like that. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, fine. That is a huge part of the comics, especially at that time
Yeah.
in the 80s and 90s was, there was the Barry Windsor Smith Weapon
Yep.
X comic, which is one of the best ever. And so they did kind of have to pay service to that. And you have multi-Emmy winner Brian Cox, who wasn't multi-Emmy winner at the time, but playing Stryker and everything like that. I was into that because that was like, okay, I understand all of this stuff. This stuff is very like true to the comics in my brain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It had Lady Deathstrike and all this stuff. But I still think like overall, it's like, oh, it's another movie focused on Wolverine, huh? And I think it was just because everybody, like Hugh Jackman became a huge star.
Right off this movie. He was a barely known, it wasn't supposed to be him.
Right.
He was a last minute replacement for
Dougray Scott, I think.
Dougray Scott, who had to drop out for Mission Impossible 2.
And at the time, so here's an interesting thing. He dropped out for Mission Impossible 2, which was the number one box office grosser of the year 2000 by a lot.
Mhm.
It made almost over $500 million, and this was only the ninth biggest grossing movie. So I think from a purely financial at the time perspective, he and his agents probably went, okay, we made the right choice.
Mhm.
But that's one movie, and
Mhm.
and obviously we saw what happened going forward. I don't even know how good a job Do Gray Scott would have been because so much like it'll be nobody wants to follow a legend, you know what I mean? And so like
Yeah.
whoever they cast next as Wolverine is really going to have an
Yeah.
uphill climb with a lot of people because,
Oh, for sure.
it was like and this is true for a lot of people. Like, George Lazenby had a terrible time because people were just like, well, he's not Sean Connery, like that kind of thing. And
I feel you have to do that stuff rather quickly.
yeah,
Like when you recast, I think for Batman they did it pretty fast. Um, and so people were like, okay, well, new Batman. It was people
yeah, yeah,
moved
yeah.
on. I think when Hugh Jackman's been Wolverine for 25 years.
Yep.
Like it's going to be tough for anybody else. But I also feel like it's a little bit of a detriment to the character in pop culture as a whole. This applies to Iron Man too, because like recently I saw someone said like it's on social media. They said like, what's the Mount Rushmore of superheroes? And it was they decided, and I agreed, it was like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Spider-Man. And somebody's like, well, what about Wolverine? What about Iron Man? I'm like, they have yet to prove that they can live beyond this one actor because this one actor refuses to let go of playing this character.
Right.
And so we don't know. Whereas those others have been played by multiple people over many years in different forms. Right now, Hugh Jackman is Wolverine, and it
Right.
remains to be seen if people will accept anyone else. You know, I
Yeah.
think they will eventually, but
I
we'll
think
see.
that, yes. Um, this is obviously a different conversation. And so pause our talk on 2000 X-Men, but do you think, and I've heard many people like opine this, but like when the X-Men join the MCU properly after Secret Wars reboots everything, how many X-Men movies do you think they're going to need to have before Wolverine shows up?
I think he can even be in the first one. He just
Really?
can't be a main character. I don't.
Mm,
I think it would be a hard sell. Wolverine is now too entrenched in the franchise.
mm,
As good as X-Men First Class was, it didn't gross as much as all the other ones that have Wolverine in it. And I'm sure that they know that like Wolverine equals the X-Men to the mainstream. He doesn't
right.
have to be the main character. I wouldn't mind if they did something like X-Men Evolution where he was one of the teachers. If I recall,
Sure.
he was one of the teachers. I'm like, okay, you can have that dynamic play out and he's there and you can use it to sell the movie, but it's not all about him.
Hmm.
But I would be surprised if they had no Wolverine at all. Um,
Yeah. That's a series I'd like to revisit at some point because I haven't watched that one. I actually never watched the full series at all because I was
no, I
that
didn't
was
either.
right at the age where I wasn't really watching cartoons anymore. My brother liked the first season and I just kind of didn't watch after that. Um, but I would be interested to go revisit that. I think my biggest issue with that was that the ages were wrong and I was like a comic book purist. I was just like,
Well, there was also they were like in a regular school
yeah, they were in a
alongside that,
regular school,
and it
but they
felt
lived at
really.
Xavier School.
And I know now that the mandate was that it be like Buffy, like they wanted a Buffy,
Right.
and so they had to have them in regular school. And like for me, as a comic book purist too, I was like, no, they live at Xavier School. They go to school. That's the school. They go there. Like
Yeah.
they take classes there. Like having them be in a regular school kind of felt like it defeated the purpose. But I heard it got
Yeah.
good eventually.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard really good. There's a lot of people I know who are big fans of it, and I went and what was it last year? I think it was last year. Went and watched the Batman cartoon series, which I was always sort of against because it wasn't Batman the animated series, and I think that cartoon's really good. Like if you take it as its own
Mm-hmm.
thing entirely, not
Right.
it has to follow Batman the animated series. And I wonder if I'll have that same opinion. Like, yeah, it doesn't have it's not X-Men the animated series, which did end like it petered out. Like the last couple seasons of X-Men the animated series are not amazing.
No.
Um whereas Batman the animated series remained great forever.
Yeah.
Um so but anyway, I'd be interested to see that because I do think it's an interesting concept. The one thing like I could be okay with the X-Men going to a regular high school. The fact that all of the Brotherhood also goes to a regular
Oh
high
my
school, I
God.
think is very silly. Um,
Yeah. It's very of its time.
and it's very of its time. You're absolutely right. Like they were trying to make it Buffy.
I mean,
which, you know,
Batman Beyond was the same. The Batman Beyond, the mandate was the WB was like, Buffy is popular. We want Batman in high school. And they were like, we don't know how to do that.
right,
And they came up with what they came up with.
right. And that show ended up being incredible. I love
Yeah.
Batman Beyond.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I think the other Cyclops is kind of just reduced to Boy Scout, and I think they never got past that really.
No.
And it obviously doesn't help that James Marsden stopped, he's barely in the third movie, and then they just kind of stopped with Cyclops.
Yeah, I think some of the complaints we have about the first movie, they could have fixed those things in future movies. They just didn't. Like even Rogue. Like Rogue
Yeah.
could have become the Rogue that we like. Maybe not with Carol Danvers or whatever, but something could have happened to give her super strength and what have you, and she could have become that Rogue by the end of that trilogy, and they just chose not to do that.
Right.
So it bothers me more because I really did think that that's what they were going to do. Like I'm like, oh, this character's journey is going to be like she's going to become the Rogue that we know, and they're just starting her off at a different point, and then they just never did that.
Right. Yeah, she kind of just she had Bobby in the second movie, which is very funny, especially now, like knowing that in the comics they've had Bobby come out, which is very funny to then make Iceman Rogue's love interest in the second movie. It's very
the one
silly.
person. I mean, the one that he can't touch, the girl he can't touch.
Yeah.
What a convenient beard.
Yeah. Very much. What do you think? Let's talk about the Brotherhood real fast, because obviously we have Magneto. We have Sabretooth, who I think, he's not amazing in that movie.
No.
He doesn't really do much of anything, but I don't think they've ever really gotten Sabretooth right in the films. It's definitely not in X-Men Origins. Like that movie is messy in general, but
yeah.
And then Toad, so it's basically, and then Mystique, but
Mystique's the standout. And again, it's because she looks so cool and has so much presence. I mean, they do way more with her in X2. In X2, she really is cool.
Yeah.
But it was a genius. Sometimes the look sells it, and it was a genius makeup design.
Mm-hmm.
Like it looked like Mystique, but they took it to another place. It was really cool. And who would have thought? But she really kind of. But I think Beyond Wolverine becomes like the image we think of when we think of X-Men.
Mm-hmm. Well, and they figured out, I think it was really cool too, that they her skin is kind of scaly, and then when she morphs, it's not just, she doesn't just change, she's not Odo from Star Trek or whatever,
Right.
It scales flipping, which I think is a cool visual.
So cool.
And it made her much more, obviously more lizard-like. And it made it much more and the way she fights too is much more kind of reptilian.
Yes.
I thought that was a really cool, I'm not I think Mystique's a really cool character, in the comics, but is much more kind of like a clandestine agent. Whereas this, she feels like very an other, which I think is neat. And the fact that she doesn't wear clothes is her own choice, which I think is cool. Obviously, yes, it's kind of titillation for the audience, but
for sure,
they made it part of her character.
And she's getting a lot of lines, but she gets a really great line of with the guy in the helicopter, which is like, you're the reason I was afraid to go to school as a child. It's like, that kind of tells you everything. It's like, this person was really marginalized growing up, and now she's like a killing machine, and sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes all you need is just the right line, the right delivery, and God bless her, she's got it, and she's obviously gone on to be great. She's great on Star Trek, and I saw an interview with her recently, and someone was asking her about X-Men, and she said that she felt very much like an imposter on that first X-Men movie because she was a supermodel. That's what she was famous for. And now she doesn't feel that way at all, going back to playing that role. But she did feel like she's with all these huge, well-respected actors like Ian McKellen, Sir Patrick Stewart, and that really gave her the wherewithal to be like, yeah, I can do this. I'm an actor, and she is so it was very important for her.
Yeah. And you're right. She is the standout, one of the standouts along with Wolverine. That fight scene between Mystique and Wolverine is one of the best in the movie, by far.
And it's not in modern, it probably wouldn't hold up water in modern, it's a little bit too simple, but it's cool.
Yep. Yeah.
This is a cool
When there's the cool things where she mimics him and he smiles in a way that we know Wolverine doesn't smile, and he cuts her claws, and she goes, like that
Yeah,
kind of
because
thing.
that's a
Like
part
it's
of her.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I dug that fight. That's still like my favorite part of the I that fight is way better in my head than the Sabretooth Wolverine fight on top of the
Totally.
Statue of Liberty, which is one of the sillier parts of that movie. But
Yeah.
what do we think of that? What do you think of the actual plot? Like the idea that Magneto is trying
You
to
know,
immutify everybody in
it
Manhattan.
works within the context of the movie, but I think because we're comic book guys, I think we probably brush against it because we know that just giving humans powers in Marvel Comics doesn't make you a mutant.
Right.
So it's like, well, okay, but in this world where there are no other, the only people with powers are mutants, apparently, it kind of does work. I don't think it's a terrible plot device of like, yeah, well, now they're going to care, like I don't find it works well enough.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know the mechanics of it. Like, it's like, oh, I power this machine, the machine does the doohickey, and it's like, okay, whatever, but I think it works. I don't have a big problem with the main plot of the bad guy plot.
No, and yeah, ultimately it's just sort of like they need to stop this thing from happening and blah blah blah. This is, it allows for Magneto to say to Charles, like, why would you want to stop this? Like, this is finally what we wanted, kind of thing, but which is not true. But I do really, Bruce Davison plays Senator Kelly, who is obviously a huge figure in the comics and on the cartoon. And I think he does a good job of playing like the sort of like bigoted senator who then has a quick change of heart. The one thing about it is like, I wish he didn't just, implode or whatever. He doesn't
Yeah.
actually have to live with the fact that he's a mutant, which I think is a kind of get out of jail free card a little bit. But um, I'm okay with it. Like in retrospect, it's fine, but it's not my favorite like part of the movie by far or anything like that.
No, it works well enough. But it also it shows that Magneto, for all of his, I'm doing this for, the good of mutant kind, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, then why didn't you just take her place? And like, why didn't you sacrifice yourself? You could have,
Yeah.
like, that's the part of him that's bad. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
for as much as we like Magneto's politics in the overall thing of X-Men, he's not willing to die for them. You know what I mean? Like, he's going to sacrifice this kid. That's what makes him shitty. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. He's still a villain, I think. And because they're still working off of what people know of Magneto is like, he is relatively justified, but he still, um, has ill intent,
Yeah.
and actions and means and all this stuff. And I think like that it's a world removed from like you look at the cover of what is it, X-Men 200, where it's Magneto on trial,
Mm-hmm.
which they depicted in X-Men 97, and then juxtapose that to X-Men #1, where he's going, "Rah," it's the famous cover, but it's like he could not
Mm-hmm.
look more evil, and they took him back to being full bad guy.
Yeah.
Um, because X-Men people don't 100% remember because it's not a particularly beloved part of that run, but he Magneto became the teacher of the New Mutants for the last chunk of that comic run, or a good chunk
Right.
of it, I think.
He was the headmaster of Xavier School for a couple of years.
Yeah. Which is interesting. And, that was something that that we know that Claremont was really pushing for, is that
Yeah.
kind of not necessarily the rehabilitation fully, but sort of making it clear that he was wrong in his beliefs to a certain extent, and he can still brush up against Charles and all this stuff, and Charles's teachings and everything like that. And that remains, that's the part of him that I think, in the Krakoa era, I find the most interesting, is that
Yeah.
he and Charles have more in common than they don't, but they still have that little bit of like Magneto
Mhm.
is willing to cross lines that Charles never would. And, speaking of Storm, the more I think about, think back on the Krakoa era of the comics, like X-Men Red by Al Ewing is one of my favorite titles,
Yeah.
because Storm and Magneto basically are just like, we're going to try to make this mutant society work because they're the two who maybe could do it. And they're doing it on Mars of all places and
Mhm.
stuff like that. So anyway, that's neither here nor there, but I do think that like they have to boil everybody down to such kind of base elements for the
Yeah.
film.
Because it's a 90-minute movie too. It's really short.
It's very short.
X-Men
Yeah.
1 is not long,
No.
you know? Can you imagine
Absolutely not.
if it came out in like today and like the runtime was released before the movie came out, like fandom would be like, this is going to be a disaster. It's only 90 minutes long. What are they doing? What are they cutting out? You know, like, but back then we didn't know what the runtime of things were until they came
No,
out.
absolutely. And you know, like the Marvels is only like 100 minutes long and people were like, "What?" Like, and people
Yeah,
don't like that movie. I think it's fine,
I think it's fine too.
um but it's definitely much more like uh oh, like old style of runtime.
Yes.
X2 immediately goes up to 134 minutes, which is much more in
Mhm.
keeping with what comic book movies are like going forward. They get a
Well,
little bit long.
they had a little bit of carte blanche with X2. Like X-Men was surprisingly successful.
Yeah.
People really wanted the second one. They were given a bigger budget. They were given, it was like, okay, now go do what you want to do. And you know, I know that the behind the scenes of that was a nightmare, but the final product is great.
Mhm. Um yeah,
Unless you're Cyclops,
unless you're Cyclops who
who
still
really
doesn't.
got like, because even Storm got more to do in the second,
Yeah.
but Cyclops is just totally like nerfed.
Yeah. And I think there's sort of like, yeah, it's a really interesting problem because so much of what ended up getting cut out of X2 was then shoved into X3 along with other stuff, and then it was just like
Hmm.
cheapers creepers, like,
Yeah,
um, and
but
it just starts. Yeah.
yeah, so much was writing on that first X-Men for nerd culture. Like it was a pivot point. Okay, here's a little personal anecdote. I remember the very first San Diego Comic Con I ever went to was 2000, and that weekend was the first weekend of it coincided on X-Men's premiere weekend.
Oh wow.
And I remember there one of the first panels, and this is back in 2000. So like we just walked up to the door, got our ticket, and walked in because
Sure.
you could do that then. And it was like a Masters of the Web panel, which speaking of canceled people, like it was like Harry Knowles was on there from Ain't It Cool News. It was all of these like, you know, people who created the sites that, you know, would later spawn Nerdist and a
Hmm.
lot of other things. And everybody was the topic of conversation was, oh my god, how much do you think X-Men's going to make? Because everybody knew like comic book movies are writing on this. Like we knew it at the moment. Like if
Mm.
X-Men doesn't work, we're never going to get comic book movies the way we want them. And then everybody was like, oh my god, it did really well. It was like a Saturday, and everybody was like, oh, it did really really well last night. Like
Yeah.
everybody was like, oh my gosh, so like is this it? Are we here? And it's like, oh well, within a couple of years we knew at Comic-Con that it definitely was here. You know,
Yeah.
X-Men made the difference. You know, it was now a
Absolutely.
viable
And
genre. People want to give a lot of credit to Blade, and Blade deserves credit. I think Blade deserves more credit in the action space than it does in the comic book movie space. I think Blade had a bigger influence on things like The Matrix and that kind of thing because nobody knew it was based on a comic book.
no.
Like it just wasn't super. He's not in a costume. He just was a cool looking dude. You know, it's a horror action mashup. That's how it was sold. That's what people thought. Almost no one knew it had anything to do with Marvel comics whatsoever.
And
So I,
it's also
you
like
know,
not the comics. Like it's very
no,
clearly its own thing. And like the only reason Blade is half vampire in the comics now is because the movie was so popular that they were like, all right, let's,
yeah,
because he was always just a hunter. Like, and you know, Blade showed up in the Spider-Man animated series, and I was sort of
yes.
like, he's not a vampire in this. Like, he's just a guy. And
I think that he was immune to vampire bites. That was what his thing in the comics because
mhm.
his mother had like, but he wasn't like half vampire. Like that was
No, no,
something
no.
that they like later retconned in.
Yeah. So it was, wasn't it? I think a thing where like she was pregnant with him when she got
Yes.
bit, and so it kind of like amniotic fluid or whatever
Right,
like
right, right. So he couldn't
seeped
be,
in like his immunity. But
yeah, he was immune from vampire bites, making him like, you know, formidable against them, but he wasn't half vampire. That's something they came up with later. But Blade the
yeah,
movie, like as much as it's important to Marvel in many ways, like it wasn't perceived as a superhero movie. X-Men was sold as a superhero movie,
right.
you know, and based on a very well-known superhero property. So I really do feel the credit goes to X-Men, you know. And Marvel also made almost no money off Blade. Like it was a very like they just kind of sold the name and that they had very little to do with it. So
Yeah,
Blade is like the warning shot, but like X-Men was the
yeah,
real first, you know, hit, and everything depended on that. And you know, like we've said at the top of the show, like the MCU just doesn't exist without the success of X-Men.
No.
Because I think if Spider-Man had been successful, maybe, but Spider-Man was a given. Spider-Man's one of the most famous superheroes. It's right up there with Batman and Superman. I think that was always going to be a given
Right.
that Spider-Man would do that well. But once you're getting into the other characters, like if X-Men doesn't work, you just don't get the rest of it. You know? You don't get Daredevil or whatever, even stuff that didn't, Fantastic Four or whatever. And people forget Fantastic Four, the first movie that was a hit.
Mm-hmm.
It made money for Fox, like just
Yeah,
because
that's,
it
I
wasn't
mean,
critically beloved, but it was a moneymaker. It was in the top 10 of the year. They wouldn't have made a second one if the first one didn't make
right.
money.
Exactly. And yeah, so like for 2 years, basically, X-Men, the movie was sort of like, that was, hey, we had our really good superhero movie, and then Spider-Man came out, and then the next year X2 came out, and then it was sort of
Yeah,
like, and then we're off and running, because at that point, then you have Daredevil, you have the first Ghost Rider, you have, all these other kind of attempts by Fox and others to try to milk some of the, the goodwill that people had from X-Men and Spider-Man, but, and then Spider-Man 2 in 2000, whatever, 4, I think 4,
yeah.
was an enormous hit, and like didn't make as much money as the first Spider-Man, but it was as critically
Yes.
um lauded as any of these movies had ever been, and was for a really long time like the most
Yeah.
critically beloved of all
And
the superhero
X2,
movies.
X2 got great reviews.
Yep.
X2 did bigger box office. It did that trajectory of like, yeah, like it built on what X-Men had created. And I mean, X2, I mean, say what you want about Bryan Singer, but his taste and the things he's inspired by are very impeccable, because he clearly was like, what are two of the best sequels ever made in genre? And it was like Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan and The Empire Strikes Back. And like, let's do that for the X-Men,
Yep.
because it lifts from those movies in a good way.
Right.
Like, it knows the structure of how, like, okay, everybody's going to be together, and then there's going to be an attack, and they're all going to split off on their own directions and have their own separate adventures and come back together at the end. And like, and it is inspired by the comics, because God Loves Man Kills is all over X2. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
very much the plot of that. So it's a really great sequel, but like, again, it's building off of what X-Men 1 did.
Right.
The bones were all there. So yeah, I mean, that first movie, and also there's another, X-Men 1 kind of coincided with the real boom of DVDs, because I believe that the X-Men DVD was the first movie to make as much money in its first week of DVD sales as it did in its opening box office. And that
Whoa.
was when Hollywood was like, oh, this is a thing that we can make money off of in a big way, and we're going to load these movies with special features. And that saved Hollywood for much of the 2000s.
Absolutely.
And
I
X-Men
mean,
was what showed them they could do that.
I had that. I had that DVD. This is a funny thing. So this tells you how, like, I guess, behind the times I was, or we were, as a people. Um uh I how you could take a CD, an audio CD, and then
Mhm.
record it onto a tape? You could,
Yes, yeah.
especially if you had, so I used to do that all the time, because I only had a tape player in my room. The big CD player was downstairs. I didn't have it.
Mhm.
And our cars obviously didn't have CD players at the time. So in my room, I had a small TV with a VCR built in. And so I tried to do the same thing with the X-Men DVD onto tape, and it does not work.
No.
It really didn't work, and it was all like, it looked like it was off of scrambled cable. Like,
Oh, that's
it
so funny.
it did record something, but it was not
Yeah.
the movie. And I found that very funny, especially in retrospect, because I was like just a dumb kid trying to do the same thing. But it was X-Men the movie that did it. And I remember watching the first few minutes of being like, oh, this doesn't look right. And then like, oh, this really doesn't look right. And it was the, the Holocaust opening.
It's the
which is
Holocaust opening, yeah.
which is not but yeah, man, like, special features really, they'd always kind of been around, but you're absolutely right. They used to be like, here's the making of, here's a bunch of interviews, here's commentaries
Tons of
galore.
stuff, like, and that really, X-Men really kicked that off.
Yeah. And
Like,
Fox was really at the forefront of that, because I remember them really big upping like the interactive moving menus, basically. Like, they would
on
have these.
Fight Club.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
made a
Fight
ton of
Club
money
and
off the Fight Club DVDs,
yeah.
yeah.
And
That they didn't, because the movie wasn't successful in the theaters, but the fans ate up that, like, it made a ton of money for them. on you, and
Mhm.
that's when they learned that that's a different revenue source, and X-Men was
Mhm.
right out there. Although X-Men has some very problematic commentary track now that they
Oh,
have
I
never
don't actually think I ever listened to them
they've
because I
never
wasn't a
taken
commentary
it
guy at the
off.
time.
Okay, so like the commentary track for X-Men isn't just Bryan Singer. It's Bryan Singer and his friend who has a cameo in the movie. In the scene where like Senator Kelly comes out of the water and there's a bunch of people like in the beach looking, and it's one of them is his friend Brian Peck, and Brian Peck gets to be the moderator, do
Oh,
the
no!
commentary with. And if you know anything about who that person is, another child predator who famously had went to jail and had a documentary made about them. And it's like, oh my god, and it's still on there. Like if you buy the 4K, it's that commentary track is still, it's the two
Oh
of
my
them.
gosh.
I know, it's so crazy, it's so cringy.
Ugh.
Like why?
It
I was like, and even back in the day before we knew anything, I was like, why is this guy on
Yeah,
here?
who's this guy?
And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, he has a cameo in the movie and he's really good friends with the director. I'm like, oh my god, now that's just so creeptastic.
Yeah. God dang, man. I
Yeah.
ah, if anybody has watched that Nickelodeon documentary from a couple years ago,
Mhm.
this Brian Peck guy is all over that thing.
Yep.
Yeesh. Yeesh on
Yeah.
well, sorry that we went down that, but it's kind of part and parcel
It's
to
part of
these are
it's the legacy of the movie. It's like it's
yeah,
made by very, very problematic people are involved, and some aren't. I mean, of
you
the
know.
non-problematic people, we have. I mean, you mentioned it, but like Kevin Feige's first Marvel credit, and a lot of the good stuff in X-Men, the comic booky stuff, is because of Kevin Feige. Like
Mhm.
it's come out over the years that Bryan Singer was like, I don't want any of the cast to read comics. I don't, and he would go to Hugh Jackman like on the sly and give him Wolverine comics. Like, no,
Mhm.
no, no. He would be there on set, like, Wolverine's hair needs to look like this. He was the guy that was like, I'm going to make sure this is as much of like the comics as we can get away with. Even though he was just like a associate producer or
Mhm.
very low level, but it was just like, you know, so in many ways, it's literally the Marvel legacy begins there
Right.
because that was Kevin Feige's first. And I think that's why he has such a fondness for it. And that's why I think he's bringing them back for Doomsday
Yeah.
because I don't think the 2005 Fantastic Four is coming back for Doomsday or anyone else. I think he has a special love for that X-Men cast because it represents his start at Marvel. You
Mhm.
know,
And they wouldn't
so
I mean, it's sort of played for a joke, but they have that whole at the end of, X-Men versus no, what am I thinking of? At the end of, Deadpool and Wolverine, there's that whole retrospective of all the X-Men
yes,
movies and stuff like that, and it was I mean, we all thought like, "Oh, that's a nice, like, tribute to the entire, Fox canon or whatever." Um, but that wouldn't have been on there had Feige not wanted it, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's
yeah,
kinda silly that they play "Time of Your Life" by Green Day on it and stuff, but,
yeah.
um, it is very heartfelt, I think, like, it is done with, like, not out of, like, irony, it's sort of
No,
done
no, yeah. I mean, those movies were
seriously.
this franchise. It launched a very successful franchise,
Yeah,
and even the ones we don't like made a lot of money for the most part
yeah,
until the very end. Until we started getting to like Dark Phoenix and stuff, those movies made a profit. They almost all did. There's a
yeah,
reason they kept making them.
um,
Um,
yeah, I wonder if it has I'll look for here we go, box office. I love box office stuff, and I know it
Me
doesn't matter that
too.
much, but, um, yeah, X2 made 407 million, which is, over 100 million more than the first movie, so that's
Mhm.
huge. The third movie made just a little bit more, 460 million. X-Men Origins Wolverine, for as terrible as that movie is, still
Made a bunch
made
of money.
$373 million. First Class made 352. The Wolverine made 414. Days of Future Past made $746 million.
Yeah,
Holy crap.
that was also the beginning of like these kinds of movies making that kind of money. That's like
Yeah.
I think 2014. Once we're into 2014, we're in a post Avengers era, and the MCU is now a full, a juggernaut, and the foreign box office was on fire. Like they
Mhm.
were just eating up everything, every big action genre thing that we were sending overseas. Not a world we live in right now. Like it came at the right time. For that movie, and also it reunited the original X-Men for the most part.
Right.
And that was a big selling point.
That was yeah, absolutely. And it was like focused on Wolverine again and all this stuff.
Yeah,
And so that was a much bigger, and also it's a good movie. Like there's that
it's so
too. Like
good. It's so good.
I think it's my favorite of the bunch. I kind of go back and forth between that and X2.
Yeah.
Or the mainline X-Men movies. Like I still
Yeah.
think Logan is the best pure
Yeah, I think
film out of all of
Logan is
them.
the best pure film, but like
Yeah.
as an X-Men fan, I gravitate towards X2 and X-Men Days of Future Past the most.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially X2, because X2 just, again, you really have the full team for the most part. Most of the characters that I really like, even Colossus is there for 5 seconds, you
Mhm.
know.
And I was so
Although it's like,
jazzed. I was so
oh, I was
jazzed he
so
was there.
excited, but the last time I watched it, I was like, wow, he really is only metal for this little
Mhm.
scene, and he continues on. You see him throughout the movie, but I'm like, oh, they really like it was a budget thing. Like he's
Yeah.
just like, okay, we only had enough budget to make you metal for that one moment of screen time. You're just going to be a big dude for the rest of
Yeah.
this movie.
And
But
he's in X3, but he's not really a character. He's just there. He's metal for more of the film, but that's about it. And
yeah,
he does a little bit more action. They do the fastball special, which is great, but
cool.
for half a second. Um, and I think we all knew this, but like both Deadpool movies far and away made the most of any of these X-Men movies, like 782 million and 785 million. Um,
Insane. It's insane.
Incredible. And because even X-Men Apocalypse, which came out after um, Deadpool, only did 543 million. That movie is very bad too, so that's probably part of it.
I have a weird soft spot for that. I know it's not good, but I guess it does enough X-Men like comic booky things in it that I kind of don't hate
I
it.
suppose. I mean, it's very comic booky. I would say that.
Like
Yeah.
it's probably the most comic booky of the Fox X-Men movies. I think it also. I wonder if people would hate it less if Apocalypse didn't look so lame. Like it's
Yeah.
such a big thing that Apocalypse looks so low rent that if Apocalypse looked like Apocalypse, people would be a lot more forgiving of that movie.
Yeah.
I also haven't seen it in a million years,
No.
but
I think I've only watched it once all the way through, and then it was on TV or something like that, and I
yeah,
watched
it's
a
always
bit of
on
it.
FX or something.
Yeah. Um, but that was one. Well, I went to the set visit of X-Men Apocalypse. I don't remember if I ever told you that, but
No,
it was right after Comic-Con, whatever year that was. Like literally the next, like 2 days after Comic-Con, I had to
it would have been
flight.
if that came out in 2016, then that would have been what 2015
Yeah,
that happened. Yeah,
2015, and that was a big Comic-Con because that was when they were doing all the Force Awakens stuff. Like it was a lot of
yeah, that was a big Comic Con. I was already a Nerdist at that time, so I remember that was like that was a big one. Avengers: Age of
yeah.
Ultron came out that summer. Star Wars, like Force Awakens, was coming. It was like we will look back on that as the peak years of nerddom.
Well, that was also the Comic-Con where they showed the Deadpool trailer for the first time.
Yes.
Or the teaser or whatever they had, and I'm pretty sure that was it. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it doesn't matter. But no, it is because that and Apocalypse came out the same year, so that would have been that,
Mm-hmm.
and they both came out before the next Comic Con. So yeah. But anyway, I went to Montreal. It was my first time in Montreal, which is one of my favorite cities. I love Montreal, but it was a weird set visit, and we didn't get to talk to Oscar Isaac because he didn't want to speak to us in all the makeup. He was just like, I feel bad. And like he walked
Wow.
by and kind of gave us like, and he's not tall. That's the
No,
thing. I was sort of
he's
like,
a little guy. He's
how
a
are we
little
going to
guy.
make this work? And it didn't ultimately work.
No, it should have
Um,
been a mocap thing for him. It should have. Apocalypse is a bigger. I mean, they tried as much as they could, and like it's just that version of it. Sometimes you just it needs to be CGI. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
and I think that hurts the movie a lot because I think there's bad things in it that we would have looked past if Apocalypse was cool.
yeah. And I like the colors. Like they always got the colors right. Once they started like kind of allowing a little more of the comic book stuff, like
Yeah.
I love Magneto's um, Days of Future Past costume.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he actually gets to wear the purple and stuff like that. I was like, okay, this
Yeah.
is rad. It's not like
You
black
know,
with purple flecks. It's actually all purple and stuff.
yeah, the costumes is such a sore point with the fans. Going back to X-Men 1, like so many people
Yeah.
cannot get past the fact that they weren't wearing their costumes. I think it was easier for me to swallow because I didn't know the X-Men just from the cartoon. Like I'm a comic book fan going way before the cartoon. I saw them go through I don't know how many costumes. It bugged me with Wolverine because I feel like Wolverine has a silhouette. The mask is very iconic and they didn't do the mask on it. That bugged me, but I'm like, okay, well, the rest of them have all had like 6 or 7 costumes up to that point. They
Hmm.
don't have a defined look. You know, the defined look for Cyclops is that he's like a dude with a visor. The defined
Mhm.
look for Storm is that, you know, she's an African American woman with white blonde hair. Like
Right.
those are the things that are define them, not their costumes, because they've had a million of them. So like that never bothered me as much. And I think for a lot of people, they only knew the cartoon, so it was like, why don't they look like the cartoon? You know, and I'm like, well, because in the comics they started out with matching uniforms.
Right.
You know,
And yellow and blue would have looked silly in 2000. Like, they
and
wouldn't
that
have
they
done
would
that.
have thought that. I mean, it was just it was a completely different time for comic book movies.
Yeah.
Like the 90s, the late 90s wasn't kind, you know, or there was the Phantom, there was, you know, obviously Batman and Robin, Spawn, like everything was very cheesy.
Yeah.
Like they
The
leaned, they did
Shadow, which I
the
think is
Shadow,
fun. I enjoy that movie,
yeah.
but it's very cheesy. It's cheese.
They didn't know how to do it. They didn't know how to be bright and colorful. They without it being camp, which was something that, you know, really took these movies to figure out. Well, and then obviously the MCU did it really well.
Right.
Like they figured out how to like we
Where
can make these
yeah, they
characters.
could steer into it and it'd still be normal. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and they do. I mean, I know that there's like an MCU look to the costumes, but like it still reads as costumes with
Mhm.
bright colors. You know, they look like their comic book counterparts, generally speaking, and the audience bought it. But the reason the audience bought it is because like we were now trained to,
Right.
because of X-Men, to accept these things. You know what I mean? Like it's a process. You know, so I look at X-Men 1 through that lens. Like, you know,
Well, and even when you look back at, I wish they would have, because obviously that they set the tone with the black leather and stuff like that.
yeah,
And then the Grant Morrison, Frank Whiteley run of New
hmm,
X-Men did that as well, but there was the yellow as part of
right,
it.
yeah,
And, even Cyclops' visor is very thin like it is in the movie in that
yeah,
run instead of the much thicker
yep.
version. Um, and so I would have loved it
Ultimate
if,
X-Men.
yeah,
The Ultimate
or
X-Men came out
Ultimate. Yeah, exactly.
Ultimate
Yeah.
X-Men came out right after the first movie. It came out in 2000. And hello, they're all wearing black leather. The tail wags the
Yeah.
dog.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. One begets the other. And I think that's sort of, and it took a really long while for, infamous piece of shit Ike Perlmutter to be like, why are we supplying Fox with more material? But there for
Yeah.
a while, it was a lot more symbiotic, even though they didn't own the rights to it. It were like, hey, the movies are really successful. Let's make the comics more like that so that they'll sell
I
more
remember
because the movies.
there was a lot of talk about how weird it was that Marvel Comics in the summer of X-Men did not, there was like an adaptation, but they didn't do anything to kind of like cross promote. There was no
No.
synergy. And it was because apparently everybody at Marvel Comics thought it was going to bomb.
Mm.
And they were like, we don't really want to, you know, we don't think this is it's not going to work out. And then like lo and behold,
What
you know,
what was even happening with the X-Men and Uncanny X-Men comics in 2000?
oh, I'll tell you, it was a really it was a weird moment. It was Chris Claremont had come back after almost a decade away, and
Okay.
they had
Was that when he was
relaunched.
doing Extreme X-Men?
No, that was still a couple of years away. 2000 was like I
Oh,
forget
okay.
what there was a label for it. He gave everybody new costumes.
Mm.
He relaunched the book. Cyclops was dead at that time. Cyclops had
Mm.
died, and it was led by Jean and Cable. And it was a very classic lineup. It was a great lineup of characters. It was a very classic lineup. For whatever reason, and he was starting the new, what were they called? He created these new villains that were like ancient mutants. I can't remember what they were called now. That like they've used them in the Krakoa era. I'm blanking on the names of them, but like it wasn't very well received. He was only on it for like a year. Like
Mm.
that X-Men launch, like it was like Chris Kyle on his back, everybody yay, and then people were just like, I don't think we're into this.
Mm.
Like, and that's within a year he was off the book, and Grant Morrison had come in, and yeah, it was a very, it's collected in omnibus, and I don't even have it.
I mean, that'll in and of itself speaks volumes, I think.
Yes, yeah, if it's collected and I don't have it, it was not. I remember not liking their new costumes. Like they all had new costumes, and I just was like, it was just a little bit too. It was like armor and stuff, and it was just like I'm not into this. But like great lineup of characters. Like I remember it was
Yeah.
X-Men number
Uh,
100. If you look up X-Men number 100, like that cover gives you who the team is. And X-Men number 100 like 2000, like that version, but they made a really big deal about Chris Claremont coming back.
Oh, sure. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so,
It was a very
um
short-lived kind of like reboot of the team.
Yeah, it was Shadowcat, Rogue, Colossus, Thunderbird, interesting.
Yeah, he had created a new Thunderbird.
Psylocke rather.
Mhm.
Yeah, this cover is very much like there's Storm, there's Colossus, there's Phoenix, Cable. Yeah, they're all. But boy, did they look 2000Z. Ugh,
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah. It
costumes are
was
so
just
gross. I don't like them.
I
I mean,
hated those
Wolverine is the
costumes.
same, but everybody else is completely
Yeah, I
different.
hated those costumes. I just did not like them at all. I was like, "Why are we doing this?" Like,
Beast has like a weird
goggles
like
or something, right?
goggles. Yeah. Oh boy,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
not
yeah.
good.
Yeah. It was just not, a great lineup, but, like, it didn't really work, and, yeah, that's where X-Men was at that point in the comics. But the big X-Men title of 2000 was Ultimate. Ultimate really,
Right.
like, and Ultimate was very movie inspired, you know? It was very, like, you know, the black leather, focusing on the Wolverine, Jean Scott triangle, it was very that.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. I can't bring myself to read more Ultimate X Men. I just kind of do not vibe with that. I
You didn't vibe with it at all. I
It's
liked the
very
first.
edgelordy in my opinion.
There's a lot of edgelordy stuff that's dated, but I did like it at the time. Like, I remember thinking like, "Oh, this is a." I
Well,
think because
sure.
it was an alt universe, so I wasn't like I was
Mhm.
like, "Okay, well, this isn't really the main." So I was okay with some of the changes, but there was definitely like some edgelordy Mark Miller stuff in there.
Yeah. Well,
You
and he
know?
also did The Ultimates, which was the Avengers run that kind of
Yeah,
at least in, visual sense kind of was the inspiration for
inspired the
the MCU Avengers. But I remember
yeah.
reading that once when the MCU Avengers movie was coming out. I was like, "Oh, I've never read The Ultimates. Let me read that." And I was just like, "This is not like
Well, because they're all jerks.
they're all jerks." Yeah, I was like,
Like
"I don't like
they
anybody in
were
this."
very Kevin Feige, to give, I don't want to, like, give him too much credit for everything, but like he was very smart in saying, looking at the Ultimates and saying the aesthetic for this is what we want to go for, but the
Right.
characterizations are going to be classic.
Right.
And that was very smart because the aesthetics
Yeah.
were very cool. It was very the whole idea of Ultimates, not to get too much off, topic, but like, was what if we made an Avengers movie? Like, how would this be as a movie? Like,
Mhm.
and the realistic art, the Brian Hitch art, everything about it was very like, how would this work? And it's pretty much what they did,
Right.
except that Feige was smart. Like, we can't make these guys jerks because Mark Millar writes them all as like kind of assholes.
Yeah. And that's really just Mark Millar's like vibe in general.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and so many of his independent comics like Wanted, everyone is awful in those comics, and that's just his way. But yeah, I think it's an interesting period of time because you and I have talked too about how much the I guess post movie X-Men comics also don't really get a lot of fair shake. Obviously, there was a lot of Bendis stuff that people don't
yeah.
like, but like Mike Carey was on the book for a million years, and you cannot get more than like a trade
No,
paperback of some of that stuff.
no, it's not collected. It's weird.
It's weird. I just don't understand. Like, you can get a bunch of Cable from that era, and you can obviously like stuff like Messiah Complex is collected, and I think they're actually putting out the Messiah
They're
like trilogy,
they're putting it out, yeah, as an omnibus form. But a
which I
lot of the
will
Mike Carey
absolutely
stuff,
get. But
yeah, that was a highlight of that era.
yeah, but it's weird that I mean, it took a really long time for X Men to kind of be in the comics to be as good as we all wanted it to be again. Um, which is weird because
Yeah,
like obviously Spider Man has had, I mean, it's had some lulls, but like Ultimate Spider-Man is one of the best runs of Spider-Man ever. But also there was plenty of other Spider-Man stuff at the time that was really good. And then obviously like some really good Avengers comics were coming out in the 2000s and all this stuff. And, um, Daredevil, obviously like
mhm.
incredible Daredevil stuff in the 2000s. But X-Men sort of like it took a really long time for that to kind of catch back up to where everybody kind of remembers. Um,
I'm
and I
very
don't know,
fascinated to see what they do with this reboot.
me too.
And like, because let's be honest, the Fox X-Men movies covered a lot of the big stories.
Yeah.
Like the only
Most of them, in
real
fact. Yeah.
most of the big ones, like some of them they haven't done well. I'm not saying they've all been done well, but they've been done.
Mhm.
So what do you do? Like, do you do Krakoa? Do you do? I mean, they haven't done Mr. Sinister, the
No, and I
one
think
big
that's a big one. I would
yeah.
love to see Mr. Sinister.
Yeah, he's kind of the biggest character that never popped up
Mhm.
in the Fox versions, even though I don't know why, but
Well, I know there was, like, the tease if the New Mutants movie, which I actually don't think is that bad, it's not great, but it's not that
mm,
bad.
mhm,
It had a lot of issues, and I think, they didn't ever know it was gonna come out, but one of the things in that movie is that they do set up, what's his face? Mr. Sinister's kind of company
right,
or whatever.
Essex Core, yeah.
Essex Core, and I think there was talk that, like, John Hamm was gonna play him at a certain point or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Which would have been interesting, I would like to see him
yeah,
kind of but it's definitely, and I would love to see, like, the new version of Sinister from the Krakoa era, whether it's part of a Krakoa era, like, series of movies. That take on Sinister is so good. Um,
yeah,
Big fan of what Zeb Wells did with
yeah,
Hellions,
yeah,
and then, of course, like, Sins of Sinister is maybe my favorite of the, like, miniseries that they did.
yeah.
Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
he's the one that they really haven't done, and they have to kind of I think that they should start there.
yeah, I think you're right. Because at this point, like, you could do, but there's parts of God Loves Man Kills, right? That could translate, and you can do that anytime because the ideas are very universal.
Yeah,
But I I argue with Hector about this a lot. I do not want them to do the Phoenix Saga unless, or the Dark Phoenix Saga, unless they're going to spend the time to do the actual Phoenix Saga and, like, set up all the weird space stuff. I don't need to do the Dark Phoenix again, like, or at least not for a really long
no,
time.
no. You get 2 chances. I don't We don't need to see Dark Phoenix again. Here's the thing, the MCU did a really good Dark Phoenix arc already that they did it with Wanda, because
Sure.
Dark Phoenix plays out best in long form storytelling. That's why the
Hmm.
animated series did it well. That's why the comics did it well. To have her just like figure out she's Phoenix in one movie, and the very next movie, it's like, I'm dark. I'm gonna. It's like it just you skip the juice of it. The MCU did it really well with Wanda. It was a many years arc before she did bad thing, like from Age of Ultron to WandaVision, a long time,
Yeah.
or whatever, like it was the better version of that, and we felt more for her because we'd spent more time with her.
Hmm.
And so I don't know how you do a Dark Phoenix saga that doesn't feel like a ripoff of Wanda's arc now to
Right.
the general movie going audience, because they sort of did it,
Yeah. Well,
so
and,
maybe
like,
just don't do it. Maybe just have her be Phoenix and doesn't have to
yeah,
go
like,
dark.
give her some time to remain, Marvel Girl. They won't call her that, but, like,
No.
that version of Jean.
Yeah.
Y you know, uh, and then, yeah, I don't mind. I love the Phoenix Saga, in fact. I love the way it was done in the cartoon. They spent,
Mhm.
8 episodes or something like that, not that many, but, like, 4 or 5 episodes on the Phoenix Saga, and then,
Yeah.
like, 3 episodes on the Dark Phoenix Saga, like, the next year. So it was
Yeah.
sort of like it wasn't just an immediate thing. Um,
I
but
mean,
I
they
don't
could
you
the movies
good.
could lean into the Shi'ar stuff,
Yeah, I would love that.
the space stuff, because it's, again, something Fox just didn't touch.
And it's weird sci-fi stuff is part of why I love the X-Men, is that, yes, it's
Yeah.
very grounded. It has a very, like, central core of, um, allegories to racism and homophobia and just, like, whatever, enter your, subjugated people of the time, um, oppressed people, I guess. And, uh, but it also can do really crazy, weird time travel, which they've already done, but space, I think that's where we need to go, like, to really
Yeah.
set it apart. Is to kind of just, like, really
And again,
play with the
yeah,
alien stuff.
they're in an MCU where we know there are aliens. Like,
Right.
aliens are
That's
now,
true.
like, between Guardians and all this stuff, it's like, yeah, yeah, aliens are a given in this world. So it won't be that jarring. Whereas the original X-Men movies, it's like they're the weird thing in this otherwise normal world,
Mhm.
And so then introducing aliens, I could see where they were like, oh, do we want to do that? I
Right.
mean, it took them forever to do Sentinels because Tom Rothman doesn't like Sentinels. They were supposed to be in X2, and he doesn't like giant. That's why we didn't get Galactus, as we got him as a giant cloud.
Right.
Because the non nerdy CEO of Fox at the time was like, giant robots are stupid. And it's like, no, but people want the giant robots in these movies. They were supposed to be part of the attack on the school in X2, which is a very, very cool scene, but it would have been cooler with giant robots.
Yeah. And then they're in the danger room in the 3rd movie, and then they finally show up in
Yes.
Days of Future Past, and it's like, "Great, love it." Give
Yeah.
us them Sentinels.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, I would love to see. Obviously, this is looking to the future, but like stuff like have Arcade be a character or have Mojo be a character. Like, be really weird. I want them to go really weird with this stuff because
Mojo would be great. I mean,
I think
Mojo.
X-Men has been
Yeah.
it, too grounded too long. Anyway, what were you going to say about Mojo?
Mojo is very of the dime. I mean, when Mojo was created, reality TV was not what it is. And,
Right?
to now and the internet and all of that stuff, like Mojo just feels another no-brainer that they could do, and they can use it to introduce Longshot and whatever they wanted.
Right.
So
Like,
I
don't
would love to
start
see
with
him.
Mojo. That would obviously be like this
Maybe
third or
don't
fourth
start with
movie, but
Mojo, but that's a great for a second or third movie.
yeah, absolutely.
There's other X-Men characters that they've never touched. I mean, I don't know if you ever want to do the Brood just because it's too much like Aliens.
I mean,
You
it's very
know,
much like Aliens,
it,
yeah.
it's
But
it's Aliens, so like, why bother? But yeah, there's other stuff they can do, and Magneto can be there. He just doesn't have to be the primary.
yeah,
What I
totally.
feel like James Gunn is doing with Superman and Lex Luthor. Like, he's going to always be there. He
Right.
just won't always be the bad guy.
Right.
But
Yeah. So, I overall, I think the first X-Men is maybe like the fourth best of the X-Men movies. If we're removing Logan and the Deadpool movies from the equation.
yeah, if we remove
But
Logan and the Deadpool movies, it's the fourth best.
yeah.
But like I said at the beginning, not the greatest, but the most important.
Absolutely. 100%. Like, it's not a movie I go back to like ever at this point, but when I think back on it, I'm like, this really solidified, oh, we can make X-Men a thing. Like, I meant to mention this earlier, but that first scene with Wolverine where he's in the cage match, like in
Mhm.
Canada when he's fighting, and then he goes to get paid and they're trying to rip him off, and he puts his fist out and then the claws come out around the guy's neck. And then the middle one starts to come out. I was like, that's Wolverine. They fucking
Yeah,
did it.
they did it. He looks like him. I know he's too tall, whatever.
Yeah.
They were never gonna get a 5'3" guy. Like, that
No.
wasn't. I'm actually shocked to this day that they have not in the comics made Wolverine through some cockamamie thing
Yeah.
tall to match Hugh Jackman. But other than that, that dude is Wolverine. Like, in the way that Christopher Reeve
Yeah.
is Superman, in you know what I mean? In the way that, like, whoever, I don't know, I'm trying to think of someone, Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man. Hugh Jackman is Wolverine. Like, it's one of the most perfect castings ever. He could even look good with that stupid hair. Like,
Yeah.
when you know that you can look good with that stupid hair, then that's it. Like,
And it looks very stupid in the first movie. They
looks
calm it down for
super
the second
stupid.
movie, but boy, does it look bad in the first movie.
It's calmed down in the second movie, except for one where there's a one scene that's like a pickup shot that's a wig, and it. Because he was making Van Helsing, so they
Right.
had to like do. And there's a scene in the snow in the very beginning when he's like around the base, the Alkali Lake base, and he's like and I'm like, this is the worst wig ever. It's the worst wig ever, but I love that movie anyway. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, that movie does so much. We could do a whole show just about how like rad X2 is.
And I think maybe we will, because I
Yeah.
love these kind of more focused episodes. And also, like, we're never going to stop talking about X-Men, you and I. So I
No,
think
we
that's
never will. Not till the day I die.
yeah.
But like X2, yeah, X2 deserves its own. It's so great.
It's great, and I haven't watched it in a really long time, but I do own that one. I've gotten to the point where I don't need to own every single movie in a franchise. I used to be a completist. I have to own every single thing, and now I'm to the point when I upgraded to 4K, I'm like, I'm only going to get the 3 or 4 movies I actually really like, and then
The 4Ks of the X-Men movies are not that great.
yeah, I haven't
Like,
put them in yet. But
I did get them, and here's the thing with 4Ks. Not to go on a tangent. If they don't do a new 4K transfer,
yeah,
then it's not really worth it, and I don't think that they did. It
all
looks
they do
pretty
is
much like
up-res. Yeah,
they up-resed it. If they don't bother with a new transfer, then don't bother. And I don't think they did with the X-Men movies.
that's fair. All right, so I wasted my money, is what you're saying. Cool.
Yeah. So did I.
We all did.
Yeah.
Eric, thank you so much for, of course, coming on and talking about X-Men with me.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Indeed. How can people get a hold of you on the internet should you choose to be gotten a hold of?
I am Geek Boy Eric on Blue Sky and Instagram, and of course, every day at Nerdist.
Absolutely. You can follow me, Kyle Anderson, at letterboxd Kyle_Anderson. I've been watching a lot of weird Japanese found footage horror movies as I'm getting into the spooky season. It can never start too early for me. I'm always watching horror movies. So you can follow my exploits there. And yeah, you can also just read stuff that we do on nerdist.com. Follow us, our work on YouTube as well. And yeah, follow Nerdist at Instagram. If you don't already, we post a lot of stuff all across the board. All right. Thank you all for listening. I've been Kyle Anderson. Join me again next week on Laser Focus when my guest will be a different person. Bye-bye. Laser Focus is a production of Nerdist Industries and Legendary Digital Networks. It was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kyle Anderson. For more, visit Nerdist.com.